the doorway, the space that he had to use was a doorway that opened out to the outside of the church. And I've never seen this open before. No, this is the first time I've ever seen this door open. So that's a nice, it's a nice touch. So what he did was to use that doorway as an allusion to the door of the tomb, right? So the idea was, well, here's the monument. You see, there's no sarcophagus here, unlike the tomb of Urban VIII. And what he did was, when that door is closed, one reads it as the entry door into the crypt, right, where the body is kept. And of course, in ancient Roman art, there's a long tradition of doors symbolizing the entrance to the tomb. The passage from life to death, as it were. So that notion of passage from life to death. So he then took that idea and put the Pope kneeling up above in perpetual devotion, and then it did this crazy, wonderful figure of the skeleton, and coming out of this extraordinary Sicilian jasper drapery. I mean, this is marble we're talking about, but it looks like cloth, and the skeleton holding aloft with his right hand nothing less than an hourglass, symbolizing the passage of time, like simply the triumph of death. This is the globe. There are four virtues represented here. This figure standing on the globe is truth. I'm not mistaken. I'd have to check. I don't recall. I can't see in the back, the two in the back. But this figure on the left is charity. Over here. And the interesting thing about it is that Bernini represented the figure of charity and truth nude, bare-breasted, and those draperies are bronze draperies which have been painted and were added later. Added afterwards. So here again, Bernini is commenting upon the passage of time. Destroyed, right? Although the two coexisted for about how was it destroyed? Well, they tore it down. They basically tore it down. No decision was made, and it was a controversial decision. To replace the old basilica with a new site. And a lot of people thought, well, come on, this is a great church for Christendom. Well, the Pope wanted a new church. So the Pope gets what he wants. But this is a typical example of a 15th century tomb. It's by a Florentine artist named Flaiolo. And it's a papal tomb. And here you see the Pope. It's a wall tomb, affixed to the wall. And you see the Pope represented twice. Once up above, seated and alive, gesturing, and once down below, dead, on his sarcophagus. And up above, he's surrounded by virtues. Four cardinal virtues, and up above there's an image of the Virgin and Child, flanked by two angels. So if you can imagine that this in the 1400s, the late 1400s, was a typical papal tomb, and you see what we've been looking at, where the papal tomb literally explodes jumps off the wall, it becomes three-dimensional. Where those virtues are no longer beliefs, but have become overlife-sized marble figures accompanying the overlife-sized seated figure of the Pope, sitting above his sarcophagus. Interesting. So here you have that sort of equal emphasis on life and death. Three English, I believe they're English Catholics. And the interesting thing, it's from 1819. And it's from a great Italian neoclassicist, Antonio Canova, who is the preeminent classical neoclassicist of the 19th century. And when I say neoclassical, what happens was during the age of the Baroque, we saw all this agitation and swirling drapery and gesticulating figures and all this action and motion and movement. sarcophagus. It's just this box with the triangular pediment on the top, and a simple circle with inscription, flanked back to back with figures. The kneeling effigy of the Pope up above. This figure of religion on the left, holding the cross, and also, by the way, a precursor of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. A funerary genius over on the right, leaning against, sitting down and leaning against the tomb. See how that body is rendered? So it's very classical. It could be the Apollo Belvedere in a sense, with that idealized sense of physical perfection. And these two marvelous lions, which guard the entrance to the tomb.
Why the torch upside down? First death?
Extinguishing of the light. Lions appear way back to Romanesque churches, wherever they appear in churches as guardians at doors and portals. So here they appear in the same way. They're also meant to be symbolic of the virtue of the person who is interred there. They're beasts of great courage, valor. These aren't they great? And you can see how he's basically using the old fresco format of placing one scene on top of another, all of them divided by these 50 volumes. But this is the typical way that things were organized in the 14th, 15th century. Private papal chapel. Segnatura were rooms where official papal tribunals met. So it was part of the judicial administrative system of the papacy. And Pope Julius II commissioned Raphael. You know Raphael was a great artist in the early 16th century.
How many rooms does he have?
There's a series of 3 rooms.
Three?
Yeah. They started painting these in the teens, 1510, I think it was, 1508, 1510, and worked on it for several years. But if you remember that chapel that we were just in, that little chapel by Fra Angelico, and you see how small the figures were and how the narratives were divided into different sections. But here you come to another world. The figure style covers the whole narrative. Broad, it's expansive. The figures are more heroic. They're on a more realistic scale. They're both more realistic and idealistic. This is clearly the influence of it's a close study of classical antiquity. And it's a new conception about how to paint.
These are frescoes.
These are frescoes. This is paint applied to wet plaster, and then as the plaster dries, paint hardens within the surface of the fresco, so it becomes a rock hard surface.
It can last forever, but
Nothing lasts forever, but profane and bleed. So this whole notion about the real body and the real blood of Christ being contained in the consecrated host, where we stab it with the knife. Because it later doesn't. Well, this one did, and so the Pope comes to show his veneration for this theological concept.
when did the Mass come into being Mass.
Well, I mean, at the Last Supper, that was the first Mass.
That was the first Mass at the Last Supper.
It's been celebrated ever since then. And this is the scene behind. We saw Attila the Hun at the gates of Rome, with Saints Peter and Paul appearing in the air, repelling Attila with Leo. So that artist, that sculptor, who did that big relief, was clearly looking at this composition from the temple. This Heliodor, who was a pagan, who had come into the temple of Jerusalem, and the archangel Michael appears, and on this horse miraculously appears and throws him out. You see, so the idea here is the repelling of the infidel, right? Throwing them out of the old temple and throwing them out of the New Jerusalem, Rome. But you also see how the architecture is composed here with this big central composition with the arches right in the middle, with an open space in front, figures arranged symmetrically on either side. So there's a sense of order and calm and direction. Then up above the window, an interesting fresco. You see at the very top above the window an angel behind that grid. Of course, that's a jail cell. It's an angel appearing and freeing St. Peter from his chains. Tonight, he was freed and the angel takes him away, takes him out of prison. Here he's soldiers on either side. Here he's walking on the right. He's leaving the prison with the angel, who holds him by the hand. So once more it shows the protection of God for Peter. But it's quite remarkable in the way it's painted at night, you see. Gathering the philosophers. In the center, you have Plato in the red robe, and standing next to him on the right is Aristotle, two great philosophers of antiquity. Plato gesturing upward towards the heavens. Plato's metaphysics, celestial metaphysics. Aristotle, philosophy based on observation in the real world. So there are two antipodes of classical philosophy. Then arrayed all around are different philosophers, Euclid, the geometer, Diogenes on 1508. Diogenes lying on the step with his cup, the mathematicians on the right, other philosophers on the left. And while Raphael was completing this fresco, Michelangelo was completing the Sistine ceiling, and Raphael, went in and saw what Michelangelo had done, and came back into and added this figure writing on the block, which is in fact a portrait of Michelangelo. It's kind of an homage to Michelangelo, that's from one artist to another. But what you see here again is that same notion of this vast space, only half of which is filled with figures, the other half is open. Architecture, and in the center, it's meant to. I'm looking at ancient sculpture. You see the figures on the niche on the left, dotted on the arcs, and over on the right. Individual, the Renaissance, the importance of man. And this is a legacy of the real art, because we always think of ourselves as individuals who strive to accomplish something. We don't think of ourselves as a collective. We think of ourselves as people. We always try to do something positive, and that legacy comes from antiquity. And this is a on a very high level, obviously, this is a reflection of those thoughts. Is the figure of Godfather right in the center, directly below him is the figure of Christ, sitting behind the semi-spherical fan-like thing. To his left is the Virgin Mary, and to his right is John the Baptist. Directly below him is the figure of the dove of the Holy Spirit. And remember, we saw that figure in the Mass of St. Venice, and the window of Venice, and directly below that, you get down to that's the celestial. And below the celestial, where you see the right in the center, on the vertical axis, a monstrance, right? A circle. And in the center of that gold circle is a white object, and that is a rose, right? So sitting on the altar, and so arrayed on the left and the right are great figures of the church from the past and present. All of them are stand around. You see them gesturing towards the altar. And one gesture has the right. It's quite futile because they're not disputing, they're discussing. They're discussing the very nature of the Eucharist. So once more Raphael has created this expansive, balanced, symmetrical composition where everything seems to be perfectly in place. Where the rest of the image takes it to another level. Philosophy, ancient philosophy. On this wall, we are talking about theology, Christian theology. On this wall, is called Mount Parnassus, right? We are talking about poetry, right? And at the very top, the very top, sitting in front of those trees and holding a viola, is Apollo, the ancient god of poetry. And surrounding him are the muses, the ancient muses, those women who come to poets and artists as a source of inspiration, right? To the left, you see a man in a blue cloak with a laurel wreath on his head and bearded. That's Homer, the poet who wrote the Iliad, of course, and the Odyssey, the great poet of antiquity. And then there, directly to his left, in the red robe, that you see in profile, is the great Italian poet of the 14th century, Dante. Okay? And then there are other poets to the left, and other poets of antiquity and modern age to the right. So this is a kind of a compendium of human knowledge. Philosophy, poetry, and theology are all brought together in a papal palace, you see? And he did not do this. His pupils do that. But he did paint this. This is the last one that he painted. And this is called the fire in the Borgo, a fire that broke out in Old St. Peter's. And this is interesting because you can see what the old church of St. Peter's looked like at the time. And you see it over there on the left in the background. The Borgo is the area right in front of St. Peter's. Where Mussolini cut the road. Well, that was known as the Borgo. And here you have fire raging on the left. And the Pope comes out on his benediction march while the people of Rome are in panic everywhere. And he makes a blessing on the fire. So it's a miraculous demonstration of the power of the Pope.
Children are running out and the old people are being helped.
Right, exactly. So all of these figures that you see down below were carefully studied and developed, and many of them are inspired by classical culture. So what Raphael was doing was looking back to classical antiquity, especially works of the 2nd century, and using them as a guide to develop a style that was infused with the ideal heroic qualities of ancient art, the best ancient art you could find. He and Michelangelo were doing the same thing. And you see the Sistine ceiling, you'll get it.
And Da Vinci, where was he?
Well, he was one of the conspirators. But Caesar Augustus, his adopted son, fought Pompey, the man who built the theater that we're staying in. He built that. Augustus defeated Pompey's fleet at the Battle of Actium in, what was it, 29, I think it was 29 AD. And he then instituted began the period of imperial rule. Rome went from having a republican, not really a republican form of government, but it was ruled by name. The Roman aristocracy, who would rule basically at one. And so he became Caesar Augustus. He took the name of Caesar, the period of Caesar, and Augustus, the August. He became Caesar Augustus. And he initiated this whole subsequent period of Roman imperial history, where one emperor followed another. The Roman Empire begins with Caesar Augustus. This man. He ruled for almost 50 years. It was a long period. So this statue, which came from his villa at Prima Porta, was discovered, I don't know, in the 17th century, I think, is a very, very good example of Roman statuary. It's everything you see, for the most part, is original. The head is original, and it shows the influence of classical Greek sculpture, but now wearing this extraordinary suit of armor, which you see is decorated with various allegorical figures representing the victories and the virtues of the emperor himself. And one of the interesting things about this statue is that he's shown with bare feet. He has armor on, but barefooted. And the only people who were shown barefooted were gods. Gods, you see. So he began this subtle slide toward the divinization of the emperor, as the emperor who was someone who was separate and apart from everyone else. In fact, the emperor began to be seen as godlike, and many emperors were divinized after their death. They were apotheosized, treated as gods. But it all begins here. That's why we even know about some many of the originals are lost. Some of the originals are here, some are in Greece.
Most of the Greeks are not.
Okay, now I got it. Very good. All right. Okay, you can lower your arms now.
Take a shot.
Some point to attach parts on to make it whole. A lot of the sculpture in the Vatican has been restored. So this piece they've chosen to take back to its original state. So the point about this sculpture, when you look at that back, you see the tremendous musculature of the back and the legs, torso, the rippling of the abdominal muscles. You look at the shoulders and the power and the force that's represented in the body of Hercules. Well, it was this sculpture that made such a tremendous impact on Michelangelo. And when it came time to start painting the Sistine ceiling that we were looking at a little while ago, it was this statue that became, in a sense, the jumping off point for all of those ignudi, those nude figures, those big, muscular, nude men. that were arranged in different poses. But this is where the idea begins, starts from here. And he was noted for his incredible beauty in Antinous. Well, while the emperor was in Egypt, Antinous was drowned in the Nile. Whether he was drowned on purpose or drowned accidentally was open for debate. But anyone who drowns in the Nile, so the legend goes, is susceptible to being divinized, to become a god. And so Hadrian had him divinized. He became a god, this young boy, and memorialized by countless marble statues which bear his image. And here you see him in this guise of the divinity with kind of this crown, this crazy crown on his head. It's quite remarkable. Well, he did cartoons with the tapestries. He didn't actually sit down and read these tapestries. What he did was drawings, they call it cartoons. But they were full scale. And those cartoons went to the tapestry weavers.
These are
No, these are paintings. These are tapestries. Yeah. The painting on the right over here is the coronation of the Virgin. You see, all the apostles are standing around this empty tomb, and that's the tomb where she was buried. But she has risen, and she sits at the right hand of her Son, and she's being crowned by Christ. She has assumed in the head. Well, that's the tomb where she was lying. But here again you have the division between heaven and earth that we saw in Camera della Santa. The big painting in the middle, also by Raphael, it's one of his very last works before he died. It's called the Transfiguration. It's where Christ was literally transfigured, and all of the apostles realized that he was who he said he was. He was actually the risen Christ. Yeah. And you see that boy who's like with his hand straight up in the air? That young boy. Well, he's being cured by one of the apostles, and one of the other apostles is pointing up towards Christ. So the notion here is that is Christus medicus, Christ as doctor, Christ as healer. He can heal both your physical ills. In this case, this miracle was performed by one of the apostles. But more than that, he's a healer of trauma to the soul. He's the osteopath of the soul. So this appearing in the sky. It's kind of a sacra conversazione. There's St. John the Baptist on the left and St. Anthony Abbot kneeling. And then another saint on the right, I'm not sure, and the donor kneeling in his red robe. St. Francis. So the Madonna and Child appear floating on that cloud in front of the sun, surrounded by cloud light. You see the clouds are actually cherubs. The city in the background, and she's sitting on a rainbow.
Kneeling.
He ordered the painting.
So you've got enough money.
Sure. We hire the best. It's true then, it's true now. You're smart enough to get the best person for the job.
You work it right, you've got enough money.
So you get anything. So this is a kind of presentation of the donor to the Virgin. So they are his saints, his intercessors.
Okay. Okay. Did you throw them yet? Okay. One more.
We're on the south side of Florence, looking north toward the city, and the large dome that you see. On the center of the picture is the Duomo, the Cathedral of Florence, the bell tower designed by Giotto, and the dome by Brunelleschi in the 15th century. It was the largest dome in the world when it was completed. People were afraid to walk underneath it because they thought it was going to fall down.
You
But as
walked
you
up
can-
to the top there one time.
Yes, you can walk up through the dome. That's true.
All right.
Yeah, 1966.
We saw the golden doors where they were on the.
Well, there are copies that are there now on the baptistry. The originals are now in the restoration studio.
Oh yeah.
And I saw them when I was here last time. They're lying on their side, big wooden crates. They're undergoing restoration.
Did they come off during this flood?
That's right, yeah. Okay, the things you want to see today are open from 9 to 2.
What are those names? Michelangelo's mountains.
That's another the Alps.
I don't think they're the Alps.
The Rockies. I don't know.
How come you don't know? Jeez.
Happening.
Bueno,
this great atrium, great rotunda, all by itself on a pedestal, which has absolutely nothing to do with its original context. The first idea for the commission of the statue of David went back to not the fully 16th, 15th century. In fact, you can trace a tradition of marble Davids on the Cathedral of Florence, a few steps away, the earliest one being about 1412 by a sculptor named Donatello. And in fact, a huge block of marble was quarried around 1440 or so in order to make an even larger statue. Why the interest in David? Well, David was sort of the unofficial patron saint of the city. He became an emblem of both virtue and political resolve. Florence in the 13th and 14th century was fighting off the masses of other city-states. The image of David, the warrior king, became, in a certain sense, an emblem of the city's virtue. So that's why there was this continual series of pictures that were produced. This huge block of marble that was quarried in Ferrara and shipped to Florence, basically sat unharmed for about 45 or 50 years. The artists who had begun to work on it didn't know what to do with it. No one had ever carved a sculpture of this would have to be this big before. And you see, it was also meant to go on this cathedral, like the other statues, which are just about life size. This was also meant to go high up on the buttons. Well, Michelangelo, we saw his Pietà in the film, and he had been to Rome, and so his fame was still young, his fame was beginning to become known. He was 25. Yes, so he received the commission to take over this huge block of marble and carve David. Authorities making a judgment about, first of all, a work of art that they felt was of great quality. And second, where are we going to show this work of art in our city? We were just talking about that marble statue that's outside the gate, and everybody hates it. They wanted nothing on this scale. Now, the scale itself, where do we have to look in order to see statues?
I know. You can see the whole camera move from side to side because you use this finger.
What period in art?
Because you're squeezing it, not.
Michelangelo. Were commissioned from Michelangelo by Pope Julius II, who's a Medici Pope, for his own tomb. And the commission for the Julius tomb was the largest commission for any work of sculpture since antiquity. The tomb was meant to go into St. Peter's. It was meant to be a freestanding tomb. That is, you could walk all the way around it. On 3 levels. The lower level would have been about 20 yards, about 10 yards wide. On top of that, there would have been a second level, and on top of that would have been the effigy, the image of the Pope. And Michelangelo was commissioned to do this project in its entirety, to do all of the sculpture for it, effigy of the Pope. And inside, of course, inside the ground level was a tomb chamber. the Pope would have been buried. So the original commission called for more than 40 sculptures, freestanding sculptures, as well as reliefs, which would have decorated the outside of this, all around the outside of the image. The commission was begun in 1512. This was a huge undertaking for one man to try to complete. And the history of the Julius tomb is a very sad one, because what eventually resulted from this grandiose program was a little tomb in San Pietro in Vincoli in Rome, where the Moses is sitting. We didn't go to see it when we were in Rome, but that Moses was also carved for the Julius tomb. It was carved in the second decade of the 16th century, as was some of the relief decoration on that tomb, which you probably don't remember. He simply added at a later. What happened was, between the time he got the first commission, the time that tomb was set, almost 50 years later, the project went from this vast freestanding monument to a very small wall tomb. So the outside of the bottom section of this tomb, and traditionally tombs had either figures of virtues, allegorical figures of virtues on the tombs, and sometimes figures of mourners. Okay? What Michelangelo did was something different. He created these figures that have been called slaves. And as you see, they were never completed. 2 of them were completed, and those are in the Louvre in Paris. But all of them share this same tormented kind of posture. We were talking about, Mike was talking about the pose of the David, sort of recoiling from the adversary, somewhere else, reflecting a state of mind. We talked about the David reflecting a state of mind. Well, these statues also reflect states of mind, and they are states of mind which are filled with anxiety and doubt and
remorse.
Yeah. So in a funny kind of way, they're a combination of the traditional virtues, right, and the mourners on tombs, people who will be crying or their heads lowered. But they've been recombined in these new nude figures, so that they're mourning, they're virtues, but they express Christian doubt. Again, this notion of doubt is sort of the struggle that goes on. Living a good Christian life is difficult. It's constantly a struggle. We're constantly tempted. Are we doing what we're supposed to do? Are we fulfilling all the rules of the church? Are we living the lives we're supposed to live? These are the questions that one can ask over and over and over again. And in a certain sense, Michelangelo was asking them within the context of this monumental papal tomb. Again, it was a kind of statement about the life we live. How do we live it? So these figures, because you can't see on them, because these figures, if I can look over here on the left, they're very evocative, because they seem to be emerging from the block of marble, struggling to get free from the block. And of course, that's a very poetic interpretation of what you're seeing here. But in a way, Michelangelo always talked about making a sculpture as if you had a sculpture in a bucket of water, and you would slowly let the water out, and slowly the sculpture emerged. It appears. So the surrounding material just evaporates, so to speak. And here you can see him working into the block of marble from one particular side. He worked, in this case, from the front, and then gradually moved around the side to work on the arm and the face. So these objects are immensely poetic in their high point. You see, here's a little bit of exterior block, then working in from the knee in, and then excavating into the block to find the torso. So he can see where the figure was, the density of it, and the contrapostal where the figure is turned in this very vigorous pose. You see his expression is like spiritual strength, spiritual yearning, of love, in essence, because he would have been turned. He would have been looking upward toward the heavens. So, it's in a certain sense, it's a reflection of the various states of spiritual evolution from these prisoners who are at the most basic level of struggle to those who, in essence, been enlightened by Christianity and know the promise of its fulfillment. And of course, all of it.
Amazing.
All of it.
Michelangelo differently on one step.
They have strong legs.
Now this would represent something around his legs. A bond.
1570 by John Bologna, and it's a plaster model, a full-scale plaster model of a marble group that's now in the Piazza Signoria here in Florence. It's called The Rape of the Sabines, and it's by a Flemish artist named John Bologna, or Giovanni da Bologna. John from Bologna. We're going to see tomorrow the fountain that he did in 1560, a big bronze fountain. So that's why he was known as Giovanni da Bologna, or John Bologna. And this rape is called the Rape of the Sabines, or the abduction of the Sabines women. Is a three-figured group conceived in the round. And what you see, of course, the moment is when the Sabines, the Roman pre-Republican Romans, come and take away the Sabine women. The Roman men come and abduct the Sabine women. So this work was meant, in a certain sense, to allude to that moment, but the title was added afterwards. It really was a chance for the artist to show how he could sculpt three figures, one of whom was lifting another in the round, so that as you walk around this sculpture, it works from all points of view.
Now the one below, I missed is that considered the father of the young woman?
Well, probably or
Husband?
one of the male members of the Sabines. This is the Church of San Lorenzo, and it's a church that the Medici took particular interest in. It became, in essence, the Medici family's personal church. In fact, the early members of the family are interred in the what's called the old sacristy, and the Michelangelo made the tombs for the figures, members of the family, and that's in the new sacristy. And at the end of the apse of this church, they appended something called the Cappella dei Principi, the chapel of the princes. So you're covering 3 centuries of Medicis who are buried in the church. And you'll see that each century the monuments get bigger and bigger and bigger until they finish in this gigantic chapel in the back. And you'll see that rich with semi-precious stones and huge bronze statues of the Medici of the 17th century. But this statue behind us over here, 1535 or so, by an artist called Baccio Bandinelli, who was Michelangelo's great rival. And the man who's represented is called Giovanni delle Bandinere, or John of the Black Banners. He was the father of Cosimo de' Medici, who became the preeminent ruler of Florence after the abolition of the Republican. So his son had that statue carved as a dynastic reference, starting point. In other words, here's my father, he was a great man. If I wanted to be the Prince of Poquat, I would have a statue of my father commissioned in heroic nudity, set on a pedestal high above for all the citizens of Poquat to see and know that, he was the beginner of the great dynasty of the Mezzotesta rule of Poquat. So this is what he was doing here.
Speaking about that, Medici, Borghese, which is the most famous Italian family?
Medici family.
The Medici, right?
So this is this church. I was mistaken. It's 15th century, no, the 15th century, and it's a very good example of Renaissance architecture in the mid-years of the 15th century, where you see these Pietra Serena, these great homes. It's called Pietra Serena, with these elaborate Corinthian capitals going down naves on each side, and then the little side chapels, all the same size, all framed with these fluted Corinthian pilasters. So there's a visually here. Everything is the same, symmetrical, ordered, not like some of the churches we went to in Rome, where everything was sort of jumbled up, especially the old medieval churches. So architects were trying to create a sense of pattern, of symmetry, and order in the way that the space was laid out and the way the space was divided. And here you get a very good example. Those are pulpits, although and they're by Donatello, the greatest Italian sculptor of the 15th century. He started working around 1400 and he died in 1450 or so. Although these were probably, each one of these was originally meant to be a sarcophagus.
Yeah.
And you were right on guessing. They were later adopted into but originally they were meant to be houses.
Yeah, they have no way to get
There's a little difference in the symmetry of the church here.
Huh?
This side and this side.
Uh-huh.
This portico.
Yeah, it looks like they had an organ up there or something. So we can walk over here a little bit. It made it easier to understand what came later. And this is a good example of that style called mannerism. This probably dates to the 1560s. And the scene that you see here is the eponymous saint of this church, St. Lawrence. And he's being, what's happening? Toasted, right. He's being martyred on the gridiron on this grill. That's the way he was killed. And curiously enough, St. Lawrence is the patron saint of football players because he was martyred on the gridiron.
Changed color too. Oh, it's Taylor.
But you see, of course, these colors, but also the use of nudes, big muscular nudes, like the ignudi on the Sistine
Not
ceiling.
completely nude, but muscular nude.
Not completely nude because this is the period of the beginning of the Counter-Reformation. It was at this period that they were beginning to cover the genitals and the figures of the Last Judgment.
The colors and the Herculean.
And these crazy poses. You see how the poses, they're all in these crazy.
Yeah.
So they're playing with it. It mannered. In other words, the style became artificial, mannered. And when we go to Bologna tomorrow, we'll see what comes after this, what the reaction to this highly articulated, highly intellectualized, highly twisted, contorted, and at the same time rather empty, spiritually empty style was. And there are three brothers in Venice, the Carracci brothers, who developed a whole school whose purpose it was to do away with this kind of painting. And they succeeded in doing so. We saw some of the results of their work in Rome, designed by Filippo Brunelleschi, a great architect. And here again, you get this sense of a square ground plan, right? Equally spaced between top and bottom. Windows of Pietra Serena placed evenly across the surface.
Rome Venice, yeah.
father of fathers. And so you see here again, you have to think, if you're just one of a number of powerful families in Florence, right, you're among equals, but you have an opportunity to put yourself a little bit ahead. One way you can do it, if you have money, is to commission a church, a sacristy, where you can bury your relatives and begin the process of grabbing hold of power, of political power. And all of these projects have, as a sort of undercurrent, maybe not so much an undercurrent, it's just part and parcel of it, is this social advancement, social and political advancement to control the governance of the city. And so you remember this.
And
now this is the
and
first.
some popes as well, is it?
Sure, because the Medici there were several popes, Medici popes in the 16th century. So remember this little chapel, and we're going to see the last one we're going to see is on a scale that's 5 times as big, 6 times as big.
I noticed that the shield of the Medici. Wow.
So we've jumped ahead. This is the final expression of Medici dynastic power in the Cappella dei Principi, the Chapel of the Princes. So this was begun in the 17th, the 17th century. And what are you doing? Oh, my Lord! I just got 10,000 euro. So you see that here there's this immense scale, absolutely huge building, with these over life-size sarcophagi and more than double life-size bronze statues. Various rare marbles are inset into the walls and into the niches up above. Everything here is on a super large scale. The floor that we're standing on, rich marbles and granites, which have been cut like intarsia into these decorative patterns, and all of this, of course, is centered around the altar. Remember that this is a funerary chapel. These boys are buried here, and of course, masses were to be said for their souls perpetually, by the priests of the church which they were supporting. But of course, this was the most obvious and potent expression of Medici wealth and power. You build a building like this and you decorate it this way. The normal guy in the street who walks in and says, "Wow." That's what I said. Wow. Wow. Whoever built this must be a really important person. You know what I'm saying? So the fact that they may be repressing you, taxing you, making your life miserable, could somehow be explained away by the munificence of their chapel. And up in the dome, of course, over the altar, you see the crucifixion. Here's the cycle starts with here we go. The Nativity, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the Last Judgment, and then this is God throwing Adam and Eve out of paradise. Oh, and here's going backwards. Here's Eve giving Adam the apple. Here's Cain and Abel. Difficult days, and of course, at the last moment, God steps in. So it's again, here's an Old Testament precursor to the fact of God sacrificing his own son. So there's an Old Testament, New Testament correspondence. There you see the expulsion from paradise over here. And on the opposite side from it, directly opposite, is the nativity.
Yeah, I saw that.
You see, so the two are connected. Old Testament, expulsion from paradise, they're thrown out. The nativity is the beginning of the cycle of redemption. You can read them backwards, probably backwards and forwards. Last Judgment.
Look code. The
Do
crown.
you have that Swiss Army knife?
Finally found the authentic crest, Mike.
Yeah, how many balls?
6 balls with 3 pure de lis on the top ball.
Uh-huh.
These two girls are cleaning the marble. And they're using little cotton swabs. And they're just rubbing, dip it in a solution, a very mild solution. And it makes it bright and shiny.
Q-tips and clogs.
No, ethyl alcohol. Unless there's something else added to it.
Però il fatto stesso per l'innesco deve essere fatto, l'innesco deve essere chimico, elettrico e deve essere contemporaneo, se no non scoppia.
All of the pilasters and window frames and molding, everything he designed. If you remember the old sacristy we were in a few minutes ago, not the big, not the rigid, but the smaller one, the table in the center by Brunelleschi. This is a sort of an elaboration 100 years later of that same Florentine style, but now broader, more muscular in a certain sense, a very sculptural interpretation. So the two people buried here are Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici, two of the members of the Medici family, both of whom died young, assassinated. And Michelangelo was commissioned to make tombs. These tombs are also not complete, finished, but they will have large figures of the river lying on
Used to have statues of these witches.
No, I don't think that they were meant to have statues of images. For the most part, he did get these figures finished, and he presented this one, in the guise of the contemplative figure, even though he's wearing armor, he's brooding, sort of pensive, and the other, Lorenzo, behind us, in the guise of, again, wearing this incredible suit of armor, holding the more active. When he was completing the works, people were complaining that neither one of them looked like Lorenzo. No resemblance whatsoever to the deceased. He said, it doesn't make any difference. He said, in 100 years, no one's going to know what they look like anyways. So again, he was more concerned with this more abstract notions of the kind of life we lead. And then these figures reclining on the sarcophagus, day and night, dawn and dusk, dusk, and he has the owl, dusk, and represent the times of day on one level, but on another level, they also represent, they may represent this whole notion of time, just a time, sort of circularity, passing of time, continuation. We were talking about the male anatomy and the female anatomy in terms of Michelangelo. And here, in each case, you can see, and especially over here, we were talking about the breasts, how these breasts appear like they're just attached. He was more comfortable, I guess, in a certain sense, with the male anatomy. But there's nothing wrong. She looks okay to me.
Well, it looks like
In the same way. And baptistry, as you can see, it's octagonal. It has 8 sides, as most baptistries are, either octagonal or circular. Excuse me. And that's meant to reflect the early Christian shape of the baptismal fonts, which themselves were sometimes circular, sometimes octagonal. So the building itself, the form of the building itself, is meant to reflect the shapes of the baptismal, where people were literally baptized in large, early Christian times, in big tubs, vessels. And now when somebody gets baptized, you just throw a little water on their head.
where is they took them away, the baptismal fonts?
Sometimes they would use them, sometimes not. Sometimes the mere form of the building is enough to its function, and smaller things could be used to put water on your head. Most churches have appended to them in some way a baptistry. It's meant for that special bringing into the fold of the church new members. And up here, of course, you see that the ceiling is done in mosaic. 12th century. These are the small stones that are cut and set into the ceiling, reflecting the earlier stone mosaics that we see in Venice in the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries.
Do we use gold or
Gate to Paradise, the cotton.
this is the bell tower?
Yeah, this is the they're painted. It's in a crate in the office of the Soprintendenza per Beni Culturali, where they're going to be restored. These are put into place. These were designed by Lorenzo Ghiberti, and the so-called Gates of Paradise, because they're so beautiful. I don't know if you noticed, as you walk in, there are bronze doors on each side of it. They were very simple. They were all in little pocket doors. This fills the whole frame. The whole field is used for decoration. And then figures are inset in the borders, vertically and horizontally at the top. So in the upper left, you see the God creating Adam on the left. You see in the lower left-hand corner of the upper left? See that? Yeah. The nude man sitting on the ground. Yeah. What does that remind you of? What does that remind you of? That seated pose. You saw it in Rome. I'm poking you on your shirt.
It looked like the Pieta.
Michelangelo.
How about the one in the center?
Well, that's phase one is God creating Adam.
In the center.
In the center is God creating Eve, not at Adam's side. And then if you can see him lying on the ground there. Right? And phase 4 over here is when they get kicked out of the Garden of Paradise. So the angel coming through the arch up above, trumpet, and there's Eve standing there with her hand over her pudenta, and Adam behind her. They're being thrown out. So we're getting the history of creation.
in one area.
Yeah, there are many different episodes taking place.
God's creating the world up above. So here's you see in the background, on the left side, in the middle, in the background, there's the tree of knowledge with Eve taking the apple from the snake. You see that? Can you see that? On the upper left, and the uppermost on the left, on the center by the edge, halfway up, above the figure of Adam, is a low relief figure of a woman reaching up to a tree. And around the tree is coiled a snake.
Yeah.
That's Eve taking the apple from the tree. The second one down on the left is Noah making the ark. On the lower left is the drunkenness of Noah. We saw that in the Sistine Chapel. On the upper left, on the upper side, you see an elephant going into the ark.
What's the one on the upper right?
The figure of God telling Noah to get all the animals. And now they and this next one over here on the right, up in the topmost portion, the sacrifice of Isaac. God told Isaac to sacrifice his firstborn son, and Isaac. It's a proleptic representation of Christ's sacrifice. And at the last moment, an angel intercedes because God had just tested Isaac.
And the figure with the head bowed.
That's Isaac. That's the son getting ready to receive the knife blow. You see Isaac's arm is raised, and the angel is grabbing his arm like this to stop him from. This is the city of Jerusalem. You see the label Jerusalem. It's sparse, and that's the way the Florentines wanted it. They didn't want to have the interior burdened with a huge number of monuments. So if you can walk down these stairs here, and those stairs lead down to excavations under the floor, which were undertaken about 10 years ago, where they discovered the foundations of an earlier church.
No
before this church was
They build
expanded.
a church on top of a church.
Yeah, there's a constant, expanding and improving.
Large. How does it compare? Near the size of, well, not near.
No, it's not as big as St. Peter's, but
Even the bigger one.
yeah, it is. It's one of the bigger churches.
Down below.
Yeah.
And another crypt up here.
So this is, people were afraid to walk under it when it first was completed because no one had ever seen anything like this before. So high and so wide, vast expanse. But it's held up pretty well. Hanging in there. What? It's been expanded. Statue by Donatello of Judith and Holofernes. Remember we've seen on many occasions, in Naples for instance, that woman who was hacking off the head of Holofernes and the blood was squirting out. That was a 17th century painting. This is a 15th century sculpture of the same theme. You'll see she's holding his head. So it's that same, all of these biblical stories have moralistic and sometimes spiritual. That's why so many things we have to by another artist, Bartolomeo Armanati, and he made this, it's called the Young Hoon.
quite a marvelous work. It was by John Bologna, the same artist who did the plaster you saw a little while ago. And it's Cosimo de' Medici, the Grand Duke of Florence, the equestrian portrait of Cosimo as the ruler. And that goes back to Marcus Aurelius, the statue of Marcus Aurelius on the Capitoline Hill in Florence. He made a prototype of all subsequent equestrian monuments. This building in the square directly behind this building.
Sometimes it's the same
Damage the facts. Really steep runs behind the logo. See that square? Getting weathered. Look, that's the same. You saw the plaster. This is the final product. So he was playing with a complex composition of three figures, one of whom is being lifted, and he was trying to create it so that it could be seen in 360 degrees in the round. As you walk around that statue, it works from all sides, not just from the front. So it's a kind of artistic tour de force. And then behind is Hercules and the centaur Nessus, also by the same sculptor. Hercules clobbering the centaur with his club. Let me walk over here. And this was done about 1554, cast here in Florence. As you can see, it's an older life-size bronze figure of Perseus holding the severed head of Medusa in his left hand. He's standing over her prostrate body. Cellini also carved the marble base, and each face of the base has in it a niche, and each niche contains a small bronze statue of one of the gods. Those are all copies. The originals are now in the Bargello Museum, and the entire composition is finished off on the lower section by a white marble framed bronze relief, which depicts the actual narrative. Medusa of Andromeda seated, Perseus flying through the air and killing the dragon. So this was a great tour de force, the casting of this sculpture. And Cellini talks about it at length in his autobiography, how at the critical moment he had to get out of his sickbed, rush to the furnace and throw in his pewter plates to make sure that the bronze was liquid enough for the final pour.
Which one is it?
Cellini. Benvenuto Cellini is the artist. Perseus and Andromeda. Perseus, the head of Medusa. Medusa was the snake-headed organ. If you looked at Medusa, she would turn you to stone. So you chopped her head off. You see the blood gushing from the neck, and blood gushing from the body and the head. He's standing triumphant.
Tu lo mangiassi la mattina.
That's the Ponte Vecchio. This is the Arno River.
And there's dozens of them.
Okay, now you say that.
Glad you could make it. Long trip, but it's worth it. Come on, Tom, take a picture. Get your passport.
Once more was thrilling.
Well, we had breakfast in Florence, we had lunch in Bologna, and here we are in Vassallo. In the northern part of Italy, very close to the Swiss border. Can't see the Matterhorn mountain from here, but it's very close by. River, town. Yeah, I'm getting it all.
You see where we're resting, don't you? The esophagus.
Sarcophagus.
Sarcophagus.
The esophagus. The esophagus. The esophagus is something you swallow. Sarcophagus is something you die into.
Okay, I got you. I got you sitting on the side of the mountain. That's the on-the-roof playground with a merry-go-round. Tom was looking for the TV set.
Huh?
Tom was looking for the TV set.
TV set.
TV, yeah.
Top of the mountain.
I saw snow.
Yeah, we saw that.
We saw that. I pointed that out.
Okay.
Sì, cambi. E come ho detto cambi? Cambi.
Oh man, that's a nightmare. All these bags, you know, it's just, you know, I mean, I've done that before, and it's okay, you know, maybe it's okay for you and for me, but you got people coming on and off.
I say I thought.
You got 8 bags. It's not we're all at the point in our lives where we can afford to pamper ourselves.
I agree.
Let's do another event.
I agree. So going back to taking taxi to the railroad.
were down below.
Down below. Looking at the sights. There's gondolas here.
Doges, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And for the next 3 days, you'll be seeing it through the eyes of Mike DeAngelis. That's a take. Cut. takes place between the Virgin and Child and these saints who are surrounding her. St. Peter on St. Peter, are you with St. Peter on the left. I'm not sure about who's the female saint. I can't see her attributes in my glasses. I think St. Lucy and St. Zacharias. But it's very measured composition with the Virgin and Child in the center and sitting high in a throne and two figures on either side and a figure, an angel playing viola in front. And even though there's a landscape in the back, we understand this is taking place in a special space, a sacred space. And one has to imagine also the sound of music playing. So it's a celestial encounter that one sees here before you, and the artist is trying to draw you into it in his own very subtle way. 100 years later, the Baroque artists would do it in a much more vigorous manner. But the intent of it is just the same. To make the divine seem human. Darius. Built at the end of the 15th century, about 1486, done in the Venetian Gothic style, and later elaborated. It's a wonderful example of the Venetian Renaissance architecture.
Tutti stranieri, se roba qua cantanti, tutti giapponesi. Se roba qua cantante, visto? Tutti sovraccarichi.
A group of Japanese tourists being serenaded by 6 gondoliers. Yes, you know you're in Venice when you're in a gondola. You hear the melodious tune.
Mi è stato, quindi dove siamo? Sì, cose, secondo.
Wait, I got the wrong guy. Is somebody behind me, see?
No, over here. Yeah, no, but don't wait. Keep filming.
Yeah.
Kiss her. Kiss her.
Get him. I'm getting you. Got him. And the sauce.
I friuli. Sì.
We'll make a meal of that. Smile. Smile. Tom, smile. Tom, please. Sit down.
È lo zio di Tenente Colombo. È lo zio Sam. È vero. Non sto scherzando. Ma non di niente.
Yeah, film.
Now, è un'altra cosa devo dire. Io non ho ordinato bene con questo.
Come aperitivo poi va bene. Un vino classico va bene così.
Wow. And now taste this wine. This is a night and day difference. Santa Margherita was okay. You know, but it was a little thin and it didn't have the nose.
Nose.
This has a real.
Got you, Henry. Got me? Got you. To your health there.
Well, here's to it. Sì, per favore.
Come dire.
Il suo consiglio.
Grazie.
Ciao.
Salute.
Tom Colombo was about to take his first sip of Rosé Superior, a light white wine from Friuli. He smelled it. It's to his lips. He's swirling it over his palate, and now
Down it goes.
he's about to say, "Good." Tom Colombo says, "Good."
Good.
And it was good.
That was good.
When it was good. Well, there you have it. Unexpurgated, unabridged testimony of Tom Colombo. He's about to take his first bite of a sardine.
Venetian sardine.
Here it is. There it is. All right, now you take a bite. You tell me.
Choking the bones.
Tom, what do you have?
I want rolls.
Saltimbocca. Delicious. Con basil.
Michael?
Vongole, sautéed vongole. Let me tell you, these are divine. You have an,
Say it in Italian.
sono divine. Queste vongole sono veramente divine. Tu no. Non posso. You're gonna love it.
Get that accuracy.
Ho preparato il pane un po' caldo perché
Oh, good. Thank you.
Michael, what are we having? Well, we're having tiramisu, and Tom Colombo was the only one at the table who hasn't ordered one because he's mangia come un uccellino, as they say. He eats like a little tiny bird. But he has convinced himself to dive into a course of my father's, and he's tasted it, and he has said that it is
delightful.
delightful.
It's very good. It was heavier chocolate on it. Where the hell did I have it?
Probably somewhere in Rome.
Was it at Hotel?
No. It was somewhere in Rome.
Was it? I don't remember.
It was heavier chocolate on top. It was delightful.
Tom, you gotta say that again.
La conta.
La contessa? Che cosa significa la conta? Io non so. La contessa forse? Il conto? Sì.
Vediamo che cosa succede.
Non si sa mai. Con lo zio di Tenente Colombo.
Il conto. It's here to stay.
Il conto scontato per lo zio di Tenente Colombo.
Don't forget his uncle.
Sì, è uno dei più belli.